Alright, so I have my paint palette here, and I'm going to go ahead and see if I've got some colors that I kind of want to mix together. I'm taking some of this dark blue color. Again, this is a Jane Davenport kind of gold colored palette. I don't remember what it was called. I'm going to take a little bit of this gray, so I'm not using just that pure blue. Use a little bit of the gray. And I'm going to put that down and see what I think about that as kind of a base color. There's some areas that I already colored that I wanted to be shadow, so I'm kind of thinking while I'm painting, get this on here so you can see it all, about what I'm going to do with the lighter areas. And this might end up being, I'm using a pretty light wash. I'm doing this on a mixed media paper. It's only, I don't remember what it is, like 98 pound or something like that. And I just did get some watercolor paper at the store, which is 140. So I can't get this one too wet, but I'm going to go ahead and put down a nice wash on this one. Just use the same color. It's getting a little gray down here, but that's okay. And it's also a little light down there, but actually there's a lot of light coming in on that part, so that's okay too. I'm going to get a little bit more paint and mix it, put it back on my palette, and go ahead and see. It's a little bit darker up here, but that's okay. Just kind of adding all of this on here since my pot is all one color. Just going to add this all down here for a nice base layer. Then I'll go back through and add some shading. Again, I am keeping the graphite on here. You don't have to. That's completely up to you. So the pencil lines and stuff, some people go through and erase them so you can like barely see them, and then you paint. I just like the style a little bit of that, so I kind of leave it. I usually leave it in my paintings when I'm doing watercolor, so then it tends to be a little bit more of the style that I use. I'm mixing up right now a gray. I've got some black and then this light grayish blue, and I have that on my palette here. I can mix a little bit of that, and then I'm going to see how I like that for these darker areas on the pot. So I've got I had this big area here. I'm not sure about that. I think I'm going to need to add a little bit of the darker blue to that. It's just not different enough. It's just bleh. I don't know. I need it a little bit darker. So I'm going to put a little black, and I'm going to put a little blue, and then I'm just going to add that to where I had started it. There we go. That's a little bit better. It's super wet right now, so I'm going to let that sit there for a few minutes. I'm going to go along on the teapot. There's this lip where the lid meets the, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just going to go ahead and draw it in. It's where the lip of the pot meets the lid, and I'm just going to draw that in there. And we have some shading back here, so I'm going to fill that in. We have shading here on the handle of the lid. Alright, and don't be afraid to make your shading different colors too. So when I'm looking at this, it's really dark here when it comes around, and then it kind of gets lighter. And then it's, ooh, that was a little too dark. I'm going to pull that up a little bit with my paper towel. I didn't like that, so I just changed it a little bit. Made it a little bit lighter. Anyway, so it goes like this. It's a little bit darker on the bottom part of this handle, and then it kind of goes in like this. So I'm going to make it a little bit darker here and around like that. And I need to do the same thing over on this side, because this part is in the light, but then that part isn't. I'm just going to kind of blend that in a little bit. And take a little bit more of this blue that I had originally. I'm going to paint back over on there. Yeah, it's just becoming a mess. We're going to leave that area for a few minutes. We can come back to it. Sometimes I get frustrated in one area and I have to come back. I just don't like what was happening there. And then if you keep adding paint, sometimes it just gets out of hand. So what I'm doing now, you can't see my teapot's off just beyond the camera. So I'm just going through and looking at the teapot and then adding the shading. I'm looking at the teapot and adding in the parts where I want it shaded, because I've got a nice dark color on my brush right now. Ooh, super dark. And I don't want it to be quite that dark. So I'm gonna kind of, that's all right, it can be like that. And then this part down here, I want that to be shaded, but I think I want it a little bit lighter like that. Then I'm looking at, this whole front has some really interesting shapes because it's reflecting what's in front of it. So it's reflecting the camera and things the camera's on. So I'm gonna just add a little bit of that. I don't need all that detail. I'm squeezing, again, these are, if you saw my last video, you saw me talking about, this is a water brush. So it just has water in this part. You can unscrew the brush part from the water part, and it has water in here, and then when you need more water, you can just squeeze it and the water comes through this little hole kind of thing in the brush and then comes out through the brush tip. So it does take a while to get used to compared to a regular brush and water. But I think I was saying in the last video that it was easier for me to make the transition, I think, between using watercolor and drawing with markers and pen, and because this feels so much more like you're drawing with a marker than it does that you're painting, because you have so much control. It gives you the illusion anyway. It's still watercolor, so it does what it wants to do sometimes, but it gives you a little bit more control to do dry brushing. This is pretty wet painting, but I was doing a lot more dry brush. I didn't even know I was, but I was doing a lot more dry brush when I first started doing watercolor quite a few years ago, and I was using this kind of a brush because you can not squeeze it or just squeeze it in the palette and then use the dry brush to get the wet water out. Kind of like how that's looking right now. I like how the colors are looking. I wonder if we want a little bit more definition up here. So this was this part that was giving me some trouble before. I actually kind of like the way the handle came out on the top here. I wasn't sure about that on the lid, but I kind of like that. Again, I'm just looking at the teapot to get an idea of the shadows that I'm seeing, and then I'm just kind of really thinking about colors instead of thinking about, I'm thinking about colors and I'm thinking about shapes instead of thinking about a teapot right now. I'm at kind of a tricky spot with this spout. So again, my brain wants to think about a spout, but I'm noticing that in the part where it's like an opening, it gets really dark right there. It's super light all around it. So I'm gonna just try to put a little dark right there. I don't want it quite that dark. And I have a lot of water on my brush right now, so I'm just gonna try a little bit more there. All right, and then I'm gonna leave that for a few minutes and come back to it. I kind of like the way this looks. I feel like it needs a little bit more, there we go, a little bit more off of there, so it's not just a big black area. And I'm not really using the reference when I'm looking at that. This part is all reflection, so as long as you get some shapes in there, I think that looks pretty good. All right, coming back up here, I'm just gonna smooth in some of these little spots where the color needs to be a little bit smoother. All right, and we'll come back and add some finishing touches. So I think my teapot for now is in a pretty good spot. I can always come back and add a little bit more to it, but I do like how I have this dark part on the curve of the handle. I think that works pretty well, and the dark here, and I like the light here, and I like the light there, and I really like the way the spout turned out like that. So I'm just gonna leave it for right now. I can go back, but sometimes I think if I mess about with it too much, it kind of ruins it. So before I turn the camera back on, I was mixing up a couple colors. I was thinking of what color I wanted to do the table. So in my teapot, I've got it sitting just on a table, and I wanted to put something down there so it wasn't just a plain white paper, then a plain white background. So I was thinking about how blue and orange are opposites, and I thought it might look nice if I took a really light, so I took this kind of rust color and I mixed it with a little bit of the red, a little bit of the yellow, and got this color, and I like that, and I'm just going to use that in almost a wash. Super dark right here, which is fine because that's kind of the dark side of the teapot. And then I'm just going to paint in around here. I don't want to touch my teapot, so I'm going right along the edge, and I might need to wait and come back and do that when it's dry. I've got paint in my palette that is wet, and my brush is really wet right now because I'm squeezing it again to get the paint to come out. So got kind of a wash going again, which isn't the best for this paper. So it'll start buckling a little bit. You can see it, and I don't think I want to pick up any pigment, any more paint on this side. So I'm just gonna go all the way up to here and get this whole part in with a light color, and I might have to come back, get my brush a little wet, and pull off some of the color from this side. It doesn't need to be quite that dark, and bring some of that color over here. So just moving color around right now on my paper, trying to be careful with my teapot because I don't want to fuzz it up too much. There we go. I'm going to get a little bit more, but again, I'm going to start on this side that's a little bit darker, and I'm going to move through to this side. And you can decide if you want to do another color for the rest of the background, or if you just want to leave